Alright, so I guess we're back. So last time we were working on building the chat endpoint so you can create it, retrieve it, add participants, and remove participants. So now let's start setting up the endpoints for sending messages back and forth. So in the controllers, let's just create a brand new controller, messages slash. Actually, I don't mind putting this in the actual chat controller as well. So we might just say, you know, put. So you want to post a brand new message to a chat, you can just say chat ID messages, and that's basically going to create a message. So let's just, in the interest of time, let's copy over all of these, and then we can change the attributes. So this is going to be send message, the endpoint, and success. Actually, the response back is going to be a message as well, just the entire message. Maybe we'll change it, but so we're going to go ahead and rather than creating the we have a bunch of models in this file, I'm just going to go ahead and create a message model.ts, and then the message contents and the message, I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of them from here because I don't like this file outside. I want it better organized. So going in here, just add all the missing imports, good to go. Okay, so that is going to be message. The response back is going to be the type message. Okay. Yeah, body. Yeah, body is also going to be a message. Now let's just create a function. Async. Send message. It's going to require parameters. Params and the body. So the type message, we do still want the session because we need to know who the sender is. Session, odd session. Okay, and yeah, this is going to return a result from our use case. Send message use case this.logger, and then it's going to take in the 3 parameters: the chat ID, payload, and session. So let's go ahead and implement our messaging. Actually, that's not where it is. It's going in here. Send message.ts, export default. Actually, let's stop this. It's working overdrive as it's sorry about that, I'm still coughing. So get our logger in here for any additional logging that we may need to do. We return the async function that takes in the parameter ID, the chat ID. I'm just going to name it. Yep. Oops. Come on. Where is this? Okay. It's going to take in the body, which is payload, message, and it's going to also ask for the session. Session. And returns promise message. I think that's good. Just give it a second for it to auto import the stuff that it needs to import. That's not the message that I wanted to import. Let's just give it a try. Oh boy, the joys of using a very repeated name. Okay, so what do we care about? We want to make sure that the chat actually exists. So then we also want to make sure that the user is a participant. And that's pretty much it, I believe. We want to crop the object and populate the ID, message ID, and yeah, let's get into it. Okay, so right, I always forget this. Chat is equal to wait, retrieve. Okay, let's get our chat ID. Now we want to make sure that, well, the chat doesn't exist. There we go. And let's import failure. Okay, so we also want to make sure if that is not true, we also want to say not authorized. Turn the not authorized failure. Actually, while we're doing all of this stuff, I'm just going to have a small to-do file just to make sure we're not ignoring certain things that we want to come back to at a later stage. So we do want to make sure that we have the Joy framework for schema. And we also want to make sure that we have a error handler, general error handler that takes in the failures that we throw. Just makes the whole application a little bit easier to use and a little bit more predictable. Yeah, so far those are the two things that I can think of. Let's get back to what we're currently working on. Okay, so yeah, we want to make sure that the messages have the ID. So payload. So the ID wouldn't exist when you make a request to create a message, so you have to create one. And I know for the chat we were using the UU. Sorry, before. We're using the UUID package, but I don't think that's the right package for this one, because the way things are stored, if you recall, let's get. Yeah, so the way things are stored, if you recall, every message, we have the partition key and the sort key. The whole idea is that the table only requires two indexes, the partition key and then also the sort key. But the sort key does an additional job of actually sorting all the results in some kind of an order, and that is sorted based on the string that are just the ID. So we need to make sure we use a type of an ID that is somehow associated with a timestamp, so that the way we store it is automatically sorted. So when the user retrieves the messages, they get the messages in the sorted order. You know, that's just a little bit of convenience that we could try to drive from the way we store data. So I believe the library is called KSUID. Just going to import it now. And what exactly the library is? Oh, there we go. npm I save KSUID. I hope that also comes with TypeScript support. Okay, looks like it. Okay, and then prefer the synchronized version. Let's just hold on to this. Looking at the library, 1 second. Let me just open that link. So this is the library that I'm going to be adding. So it looks like the easiest way is to just import it using the require. Then you can either use a synchronous or an asynchronous approach. Let's test this out. I'm just curious. Does it automatically? Yeah, let's do this. Okay, dot random sync. All right, let's do it again. It seems to be in ascending order. Okay, that's good. So it was E1, EK, EM, F. So it's, yeah. So I don't think we need to do anything special. We just ask for say const ks ready equals require it. Not ideal to be mixing up our imports and requires, but in this case, does it work? I guess it does. Okay, so let's do that. And what are we doing on the string representation? I believe. Let's try it one more time. Yeah, that's fine. That's what we need. We need it as a string. We also need to. Yeah, okay. So message is not. If you recall the chat model, it has. It's basically extending the DB record, and that's what we need to do here as well. So let's go over to the message model and make sure that it's extending the DB record. So now let's take a quick detour. Instead of coming, we'll come back to this in just a second. Before we actually start utilizing methods to save and retrieve messages, we do need to actually implement those methods. So let's do that. So you want to be able to save the message. So and we want to be able to right function. We want to be able to retrieve an individual message. There we go. Unexpected keyword. What? What's different between how this is done? Static async create. Yeah. So I don't know why. Okay. Yeah, I guess function is not really needed. It's inside of a class. We want to be able to retrieve it. We want to be able to update a message. Yeah. So because messages live inside of a chat and they have pretty tight connection to it, we do want to make sure that we always ask for the chat ID as well. There should be it's a lot easier to not have messages retrieved directly with the message ID. We want to be able to require the chat ID to be passed in. So we'll do that as well over here. And the same thing here. We wanted to, in order to save the accident message, we still need the chat ID. Because a message really lives only inside of a chat. It can't really live outside of it. And that's kind of the idea behind it. We want to be able to also query messages, right? We want to be able to say, list the messages. So that returns an array of messages based on, well, some kind of a simple query options, but I'm not exactly sure what that's going to look like right now. So I'm just going to return, basically throw an error message that says not implemented. That's fine. So let's go ahead and implement these, and then we'll try it out. And yeah, well, let's get started. In the interest of saving some time, I'm going to do a big no-no that I would normally recommend anyone not to do, is basically copy and paste messages out of code. It will lead to all sorts of errors, but sometimes it's fast. So let's go ahead and create a new message object from here. And before this works, we need to make sure our constructor is implemented correctly, which requires an input of the type message, and we need to do stuff for the partition key and other properties as well. We'll come back to this one. Let's not get bogged down in doing things in the exact order. So this model is always going to have its own partition key and sort key, and it goes into the table, and there's nowhere else the message will exist, so we can get rid of that. That looks good, I think. We just store the message in here. Alright, so what is the partition key and sort key? That's going to be chat ID. Sorry, chat. And okay, so a message needs to know the chat ID that it belongs to. So let's go back in the message model and make sure that we right, it needs to exist. So now that we have a chat ID, we can go ahead and say this dot sort key message. That's the message. Alright, so we'll just go ahead and do the same thing for the rest of the properties. Sender ID, timestamp. Yeah, timestamp is not really required anymore because we were getting some properties like created at and updated at from the DB record, so I'm going to get rid of this one. But I do want to have another property instead of timestamp, and that is edited, and that's a boolean. Sometimes if you edit a message, you want to make sure that we flag that somehow. So yeah, okay. So let's make sure that and lastly, yeah, so the message contents. For now though, I really like, so it's not ideal, but the text message, the very standard one, we're just gonna keep plain text for now, because I haven't really thought through on the best way to encrypt the message to store it. I just want to make sure everything works end to end before we start adding in the necessities of privatizing the message and encrypting the message, that sort of stuff. Okay, so we got the contents. So far, so good. All right, so we're storing the message here, and then we're returning back the well, we're returning the object there. So chat ID. So I guess it doesn't really need it, because we are going to make sure that the chat ID belongs to the message object. So that's the first part. Okay. Let's go ahead and add the retrieval, which is coming from the client. And we want to be able to get params. Let's make it a promise, and then we can say key right needs a table name, and it needs the partition key. That is from there we go. So if the item doesn't exist, we have to return null. Otherwise, the message out of that. Yeah. Okay. So we can retrieve it. We want to be able to update it as well. So whenever we update, it's actually the same as the save message. But do we want to do? Do we want to have a different? Yeah, I don't think we need it. We can just reuse the save one, because we didn't actually implement an update chat, right? Oh, we did. Why did we do that? I don't think we would need it. Kind of have a feeling update is not needed. We can just put transact right. But I'm just curious. It's really about DynamoDB. Let's just see what happens if you insert. Yeah, sure, accept the cookies. I think if you put twice, it's just puts whatever object goes in there, unless we want to provide an update that's like update one or two properties but not the whole thing. Given that it's such a small object, I feel reusing save is good enough. Normally this form of an update is usually good if you have like a lot of properties and you want to expose your API in such a way that you only want to pass in the participants rather than the entire object every single time to make updates to it. So sometimes you get a partial object, and it's good for updating partial objects, right? But I don't think it's really required in this scenario, so I'm just going to get rid of this. We just have a save, and we just reuse that. If you need partial updates, we can go ahead and bring this function back up, and we should be good to go. Let's not worry about the list yet, but we will get to that today. Okay, so I'm going to send the message. So before we send it, let's make sure that we have the created at and payload created by is this user. Lastly, so sometimes it just helps to I could just overwrite it, but I prefer to let the client do a little bit of work and making sure that it's not the same, then we're just going to overwrite it. So if you try to write a message but pretend you're a different sender, we're just going to say, yeah, I'm not going to buy that, I'm not interested, just throw an error rather than trying to be nice and overwrite the actual sender ID. Yeah. Let's make sure the object coming in is actually valid and not try to do a lot of doctoring on our end. So what else do we need? Yeah, we want to make sure right now we're not implementing any different type of messaging. We just want to have text, plain text messages. So if the payload type is not equal to text, just say not implemented. What other failure types are there? Service unavailable is a good one, so I'm just going to go ahead and use that. Maybe that's not really what this is for. Whatever, let's just throw that not implemented without any special type. Okay, so now that we have our payload, we can right. We also want to make sure that the payload chat ID is the same. If it's not the same as the chat ID that's coming in, we're going to throw an error saying bad request. Yeah, bad request really. Okay. The reason is that we end up saving whatever's in the payload. We want to make sure that it's valid, and if it has a different chat ID, then things just go haywire. So we don't like that. I believe that's everything. So let's just then say message save the payload. That is the saved message, and let's just return. I could just return this directly, but I would prefer to kind of just store it in a variable, just so we can do a little bit of logging, at least for now. We can always come back and clean it up. And saved message is right here. All right, let's do some testing. Right, so let's go ahead and import our use case, send message. I also do think that we want to just write the retrieve. We also want to import these don't exist. I'm gonna just implement this in one single shot, and then we're gonna test them all together. Update message use case from. Yeah, so let's go ahead and implement all this. So I'm just gonna stop this server. We don't really need it. We need to still do a little bit of more work. Okay, export default. Okay. All right. So let's retrieve. I can't spell. Yeah, let's import everything that's missing. Logger comes from here. Auth here, and then yeah, this is gonna go. It's gonna be kind of confused. Let's go ahead and find. Okay, so if alright, that does that. Then we want to make sure that you are the sender, original sender of the message before we update it. So let's go ahead and retrieve the message. There we go. Message doesn't exist, same deal. Throw not found. If you are not the sender, we are going to not authorize. Okay. What other validations do we need? We definitely need to edit it, set this to true, data that, and then message dot. Well, now circumstances and updated at by is always going to be the same person because yeah, because it's always going to be done by the owner. But we have these objects in the database, we might as well, the properties in the database record, we might as well use them. Is there any other property that we need to modify? Oh wait, what am I doing? Oh, I'm so sorry. That was silly. Yeah, it's. Oh yeah, we want to. If the message doesn't found, is not found. I thought I was writing the update message, but I am only writing the retrieve message. Okay, so if the sender. Sorry. Before you even bother to get the message, you want to make sure that you're a participant of the chat. So you're at least one of these people. So you could say if you're not a participant, not authorized. Okay. Okay. Right. Not authorized. Let me just return. That should do it, I believe. I'm not sure if there's any other check that I should be doing. I can't really think of it. Yeah, okay. So, retrieve message. Right. There we go. There we go. So we are going to add that endpoint right now. Get message ID. All right. We don't like to copy it, but we have to just to speed things up a little bit. This is going to be retrieve message. We're going to get the message, and the parameter is string. Yeah, that's not right. That's supposed to be string. Yeah, there we go. And this is message ID. It's a string, and it's returning back. We don't have anything in the body, just a simple get. So, okay. You might be wondering why I'm updating all of this stuff. It's just really handy for Swagger UI, and later on, we're actually going to be using the Swagger JSON to generate an API for our Dart and Flutter side of things, or even front end like websites. We can use that. The operation ID is what's going to be driving how the code is generated. So the generated API is very much in line with what our backend is doing. So just a little bit of what we can do to make things a little bit more cohesive. Create message use case. There is no payload, but we do have message ID. And let's get rid of this. You gotta be very careful when you copy paste stuff, because you do copy things that are totally irrelevant and cause all sorts of problems and possibly hours of wasted time debugging things that don't matter. What is the other endpoint? We want to update the message. Okay, so it's going to be very similar to this one. Instead, it's going to be put vol, and the body is going to be the message. Yeah, that is. I believe. Let's double check every single line. So it's not going to be 201, it's going to be 200. It's just going to return the message. We have the two properties and the body is that. But in this case, we do want the payload. And this is going to be update message use case. That's going to take the parameter ID, which is the chat message ID. That is the message ID, and then lastly the payload, and then finally the session. Yeah. So update message, it's not here. Okay. So okay, and then kind of long the parameters. So that method is going to return a promise of a message, and let's implement this. So why do we really need well, you're updating a message, you could just take the chat ID and also the message ID directly from there. Why do we really need it to be passed in from the parameters? It's a personal choice. I prefer to just have that additional check to make sure that um, the client is a little bit trustworthy, I guess. But it's really a personal choice. You can just ignore these two properties, get the payload, and then get the chat ID and the message directly from that. But I'm exposing the properties in the path, so I'm just going to use them to validate it. So if it's not equal to chat ID, that's just going to return no failure. They're all the same, then the same thing, it's a bad request. So now that we have at least the path parameters there, so we want to retrieve the chat. Let's get the chat ID, and we want to make sure that the chat exists. If the chat doesn't exist, we'll return the not found failure. Okay. Then if you're not a participant, you should not be able to update a message, right? So the list does not include then all right. So continuing on, yeah. So in order to update the message, you want to make sure that the message itself exists. So okay, if the message doesn't exist, just return the not found there, and then we want to make sure that the edited is true. Updated add is modified as well. Yeah, so that is ideal. So now that these three things are updated, we can just go ahead and save the message. And once that is saved, we can go ahead and okay. I'm definitely on the fence whether we need to implement an update method or we can use the save as is, but I think it's okay because we're actually getting the message directly from the server. We need to also make sure that the contents, that's usually what gets modified, right? So contents are modified. What other properties are changed usually? Nothing else, to be honest. It's usually all the contents that are modified. Okay. We also have some additional checks saying like, oh, if you had a message that is a file, can't really modify it. You can always delete it if you want to. So that's thing. If you only modify the text. The other ones you can't really modify it, so you have to delete it. So just make it. Yeah, there we go. Then update the contents, save it, return the save message. Okay. And finally, we want to fix this. All right, save this one, and this one, and it's time to test. Let's bring over our Swagger endpoint. Let's bring over the auth token. Just gotta make sure we log in as soon as the app starts up. Okay. All right. So log in. You know we have the token. So all right. Execute this. It's an invalid token. Okay, that's fine. Just go through the whole process again. Try it out. Okay, so let's get me a new. What happened? What? Sorry. Oh yeah, why am I registering? Yeah, definitely a little bit on the tired side right now. It's pretty late on my end. Okay. And yep, I've got my there we go. So now I should be able to get a new ID token. Copy all this, jump over here, and we are going to copy this ID token. Right. Minimize the stuff we don't need anymore. Let's authorize. All right. So chat ID. Execute. So we got chats happening. We want to post a message. So let's try it out. It's a chat ID. We don't need the updated. We don't need any of this stuff. We do need the chat ID to match. Oh, that's a good thing. In the controller, in the send message. Yeah, we do have that check. We want to make sure that the payload's chat ID matches the actual path parameter. So that's good. We don't need the ID. We do need the sender ID to match this one. So I'm going to go ahead and take that, copy that. So the sender ID is here, edited. It's going to be false. I do prefer to, in the future, set it to false, even if it comes true from the client side. Because if you're creating it, it cannot be edited if it's being created, and this isn't text. Contents are going to be hello. and we don't need the path. We just need this one. Okay, so let's try to save it. And yeah, we're gonna get an error, of course. So cannot read properties of random sync. Yeah, okay. So that's probably because we have to import it in different ways. So let's go ahead and say that should do that. Yeah, okay. So this might work. So let's just let it restart. And we'll give it a try one more time. So okay, looks like the chat message has been created, and that's the message. The sender ID is matching the creator ID. Okay, so let's do this. We have the message ID, we have the chat ID, so let's retrieve it. And that's the message ID, and then execute. Okay. Uh-oh, so it looks like it did retrieve it, but it just hasn't figured out what the partition key and the sort key is. And I don't think it should be returning this partition key and the sort key, to be honest. It's another thing we gotta fix. These are like internal stuff. We don't really need that to be exposed. So jump over to do and say need to be excluded from the output. We don't want that to be sent. Kind of have a feeling that if we do we just make them API properties and then say yeah, it looks like we can't. I don't really like having them in the output, but that's okay. We'll follow up on that. It's not ideal. And I think using something like JOI for schema really helps solve that problem. You can do tons of really cool stuff without a whole lot of logic, just based on definition of your schema. It's this library over here. This little library over here. You can define your object, and you can say username. Make sure that it is, required. It's between 3 and 30. You can make sure your password property is a certain format. Yeah, lots of really cool stuff we can do with JOI. We're going to do that in one of upcoming sessions, I guess. Okay, so let's fix this partition key and the sort key problem, and we're going to start modifying this stuff. Actually, no, let's just do, we might as well try to modify it. So we got the body, so let's take the whole thing and we're going to paste it in here. I'm going to say hello world instead of that. So message ID and chat ID are here. Let's just run it. Okay, so we got an error. It's a bad request. It's a bad request. Update message, bad request. God. Okay, there could be a couple of things that are wrong in that, and that is that we are also missing a few important things here. We're missing the message ID and the chat ID. Okay, so we found a couple of bugs here. We're gonna end up creating another message and test it again. So let's go back here and let's take a quick look at the objects that we have. And as you can see, this is the message. Let's look at the JSON format. We didn't store the chat ID and the message ID, so that's an issue for us that needs to be fixed. So let's do that. The chat model. Not the chat model. Sorry about that coughing again. Chat ID, right, so we do need to that's what's missing. Luckily, we should always still be able to retrieve it, and the next time around when we go ahead and modify it, it should allow us to save it, but we'll just abandon that for now. We'll try. Okay, so retrieve the message. What's happening when we retrieve it? We get this particular message. We do want to make sure that we return a new message after that. Is that what we did for the chat, retrieve chat as well? Not really. So why? Oh, because we're already doing this. So in the retrieve message, oh, we do that. Okay. Yeah, that's right. The reason why it's undefined is because we never stored it in the first place. So none of this is required. That was the only bug that we needed to fix. Okay, so let's just run it one more time. So we had hello before, but this time around we're going to say this is a message. And let's save it. So this time around we are storing the chat ID and the message ID. So that's a good start. Take the whole thing and just retrieve it. Yeah, oh right, that's right. We are retrieving the wrong message, so let's go ahead and retrieve this message. Okay, so it's got the whole object in there, this time with everything. So let's just pass this message in here. Let's update that. This is a message that has been updated. Also, editor flag should be true now. Alright, so let's execute this. Okay, so that is a problem. So edited flag should have gone and been set to true, but looks like it was not. Wonder why. edited. Should have been set to true. Okay, I'm going to run this one more time, but this time with a little bit of logging here. Message. Right, we are not saving the right thing. We should just be saving the message of doing a bunch of updates. Okay. So this time it should become true, and it is. Okay. Great. So now we have added the ability to add a message, retrieve it, and update it. And in the next one, we're going to start to do a little bit of querying. So let me just do that here. Yeah. So after post, we want to make sure we have the ability to get the messages, and we'll call it list messages. It is going to return an array of messages, and there is no body. The ID is in the parameter, and we do want a few query parameters like number of messages, before timestamp, after timestamp, and yeah, that's pretty much it. And we're going to make before and after timestamp required. That will make sure that our query is always utilizing the sort key. So that's what we're going to do when we get back in the next session.